from the Greater San Francisco chapter. Please join me in welcoming Matt Gidney.
Thanks. So the last time I gave this talk, it was just to my team and training group in San Francisco, and a bird pooped on my head. And so, and it wasn't even like a little bit, it was like a pelican that just came from like a Mexican buffet. It was like all over the place. But everyone was like, well, it's okay because it's good luck. And it was actually 2 days right before I was getting the results of a checkup, and it turned out to be great. And so maybe a bird will crap on me again, though I kind of hope not, because it actually still kind of, see, you never know. You never know. So, anyway, so I'm going to tell you a little, just my cancer story, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I both hate team and training and also love team and training, which I know is a little bit of a strange thing to say at a team and training event, but it'll make more sense in a little bit. So I was diagnosed in September of 2006. I had just moved, I was living in New York City, and I had just moved to Boston for grad school. And, Boston. I had been having headaches for like 3 years, and I'd been going to doctors like nonstop, and everyone thought I was a hypochondriac, and all my friends and parents would make fun of me. And, but I would always go to the doctor, and they would diagnose me with all kinds of different things, like exercise-induced headaches and high blood pressure, even though I was relatively young and in very good shape, but they couldn't quite peg it down. And the summer beforehand, I was taking all these photos for like going away events, and I was noticing that I had a double chin. And that was really weird because I was exercising all the time, and everything else was pretty healthy, but this double chin was kind of growing. And when I got to school, I had just moved in my stuff, and the headaches that used to come when I would exercise now came when I would go upstairs and unload the dishwasher, and any kind of physical activity was triggering this sensation of like the blood rushing to your head and not being able to come back down. And so I went to the doctor, the on-campus doctor, and he said, well, I showed him like all the papers that I had and all the drugs that I was taking. He's like, well, I don't know what you have, and maybe you have all these things, I don't know, we're going to start from scratch. And so they sent me to the campus infirmary and said, it was Friday afternoon at like 5 o'clock, I had just finished like my first week of class, and all my classmates were like, okay, we're all going to go to the bar. I was like, oh, I'll meet you there. I got to stop off and just get a chest x-ray real quick, and then I'll meet you guys there. And so I went over to the campus hospital and got my chest x-ray, and just because I'm somewhat neurotic anyway, I was just like, is there somebody here that can just quickly take a look at it? I don't really want to wait all weekend and just tell me the results. And she's like, oh yeah, so we'll have somebody, just why don't you sit right here? And so they put me in a little room, and about 10 minutes later, a doctor came in, and she said, so Matt, where's your family from? And I was like, oh God, that's not good. And she said, look, I'm not a radiologist, and I've never seen this before, but you have cancer. And I had a tumor the size of a fist in my chest. And that had been growing for about 3 years, so I basically have something that's called mediastinal large B cell, and it was very, very large. And so they didn't really know what to do, so they were like, well, go home, and we'll call you on Monday and let you know what to do. And I was like, okay, but I had just moved to Boston, and I didn't really have a home yet, so I kind of just wandered around the city, and very much feeling sorry. It was like sunset. You're like sitting by, ooh, hi Samantha, sitting by a river. You're literally sitting on the Charles, and you're watching like people rowing by, and you're feeling very melodramatic, and so I called my best friend because I couldn't call my parents yet because I didn't have any answers for them. I didn't know anything, and so I called him, and he's a doctor, and he's like, well, let's not worry about it. And the one thing that the woman did say, so she said, you have cancer, and I was like, so I immediately broke down, of course, crying. But kind of like a little part of me was also like, I knew it. It's kind of like, ha, told you so. And she said, look, it's not necessarily a death sentence, is what she said. And then sent me on my way. And and so I talked to my friend, and then about while I was on the phone with him, they actually called back. The doctor called back, and she's like, we showed these X-rays to some people, and you actually need to go to the hospital right now. So go to the Brigham and Women's Center, and they'll be expecting you. So I went to the Brigham and Women's Center, and I showed up, and it was like a crazy hectic ER, right? So it's like completely packed, and people are coming in from car accidents and things like that. And I just kind of show up looking really relatively healthy, and I just said, you know, my name is Matt. They sent me over from the student infirmary, and they're like, well, we don't have a record for you. We don't know, like, we have no information here. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to wait. And then that's kind of like when I lost it really for the first time. And I was like, look, and I told the woman, I was like, I'm sorry, I was just told I have cancer. You're the only person I really know in the world right now, so you really need to take some time and help me out. And she did. She was actually really nice after that. And so the next 2 weeks I basically spent in the hospital. And my parents came up the next morning, so I was going into surgery. They did a CAT scan and CT scan, and they said, yeah, you have a very large tumor in the middle of your chest. But the bigger danger was, and that was causing these headaches, I had something called superior vena cava syndrome, which means my tumor had gotten so big over such a long period of time that I had an 8-inch blood clot in my SBC above my heart, which is why I was starting to swell. And so I was starting to swell very gradually, but at this point it was going very fast, and my arms were starting to swell and my neck was swelling. And so they said, well, we're going to put you in the surgery tomorrow morning, and so you need to call someone. So I called my parents at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning after spending the night in the hospital, and I said, hi, Mom, do you guys want to come to Boston? And she's like, why are you, you've never called at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. What are you doing up? And I was like, well, I need you to come to Boston right now. I just got diagnosed with cancer. So, and my parents it's a 3-hour flight. They were there in 4 hours. So that's pretty impressive. For the next 2 weeks, I spent in and out of surgeries. And the hardest part about cancer, for those of you who don't know, is diagnosing it correctly. And if you ever do know anyone who gets diagnosed with cancer, or you yourselves unfortunately ever have to go through that situation, please make sure that you go to someone who diagnoses it correctly. Most of the errors happen that way. And so they took them a long time to diagnose me. When you have a tumor in your chest, it's pretty hard to get to. And so I went through lots of different surgeries and trying to they had to break up this blood clot, and there was lots of fights between the vascular surgeons and the oncologist about what to do and all these different things. So all the while I'm waiting for this diagnosis. And while I was waiting for the diagnosis for about 2 weeks, my father would take me for walks around the ward, because I was really completely drained. I was swelling tremendously. I had no energy whatsoever. But the big day outing was I would get out of bed, and it would take us about an hour to get like the robe on and the slippers and hook me up to all the right machines. And we would walk in a couple different laps around the ward. And that was the exercise of the day. That was like the big thing. And so it was like, when are we going to go on the walk? And it was an entire huge effort, and it was one pathetic step after another, wearing a robe strapped to this like machine, and you would just walk. We would go for hours, and then by the time you got back, you're completely exhausted. And by that time, so after 2 weeks of that, I got diagnosed, and I got diagnosed correctly. And I immediately started chemo, and I shrunk down. I literally lost 20 pounds of water weight in an hour. It was pretty amazing. And so, and then I was actually checked out of the hospital the next day and was back at school 2 days later. And for the next 5 months, I went through chemo, and I got 6 series of what's called CHOP-R, for those of you who are so inclined. And then I went through 4 weeks of mantle radiation. And now I'm in remission. So, after that, I decided some friends of mine were